with mid to long range missiles. Joining me now again, Herb London, the president of the London Center for Policy Research, J.D. Gordon, a former Pentagon spokesperson and a former commander in the U.S. Navy, and back with us, Bruce Klingner. And on the phone, Peter Brooks, former Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary, now the Heritage National Security Affairs Fellow. Peter, I start with you. Your reaction tonight to what we're hearing from the Rogue Nation. How worried should we be? How concerned? Is this unusual? Does it never happen? What's your reaction?
Well, obviously very troubling. The situation, the threat from North Korea, as I'm sure my colleague Bruce Klingner has shared with you, is increasing. There probably are some additional steps that North Korea needs to make it an even a greater threat than it already is, including the accuracy of its missiles and the ability of a warhead to be able to withstand intercontinental ballistic missile flight, which a warhead would be subjected to G-forces and temperatures and vibrations and route its intended target. But this sort of rhetoric we cannot dismiss. It's very troubling. And there's possibility of greater tensions ahead.
Possibility of greater tensions. Bruce, to you, just more reporting coming out tonight. Kim Jong-un was also photographed beside a nuclear warhead design and missile airframes to show that North Korea has warheads small enough to fit on a missile. This was testimony in May, so some folks feel like they've known this already, that this has, possibly been out for longer than we think. Does that mean they're further along in their development than we think?
Well, one of the things about the North Korean statements, just doing a quick look at the statement, it seemed, at least in one of the statements, it was conditional, that North Korea would attack if they detected signs of the U.S. attack or provocation. So that's more consistent with previous statements where they'll have a bombastic threat, but then it's usually if the U.S. does something. So that's less worrisome than a unconditional one. But again, obviously, any kind of threat to any U.S. territory or allies is very concerning.
Well, right to what you say, here's the quote from state media. North Korea says it could carry out preemptive operation once the U.S. shows signs of provocation. So to your point, it's like, if this happens, then we attack. So Herb, to you, how are you feeling about this now? I mean, does this assuage your worry, your concern at all?
This is a far more specific threat than some we've had in the past. It is very worrisome. At the same time, because of the contingencies that you made reference to, it is very obvious that the North Koreans are looking for a way out of this. And so they may very well feel that if the United States is not engaged in what they consider to be provocative acts, they won't be acting as well. Nonetheless, this has to be taken very seriously. And it seems to me that the United States has an obligation to start thinking about THAAD and a variety of other mechanisms that are necessary to withstand any potential attack.
J.D., NSA Chief McMaster has been saying that we need to explore all options. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to have all options on the table, including a military option. I understand Kim Jong-un worries at night, at least according to South Korean intelligence. He worries about a decapitating strike from Navy SEALs. Well, that's a pretty good thing to worry about. But I also think Kim Jong-un has a motive to attack our markets by rattling them. So by these type of statements that he's going to attack Guam or launch missiles there, that actually hurts our economy by rattling our markets. I think that's also one of his motivations.
Sure does. It's a good point. Peter Brooks, to you. How did it seems like all of a sudden we're at crisis levels instead of like this slow ratcheting it up. You turn around and suddenly people are talking about striking Guam. Did we miss something? Has there been a slow burn going on this for a long time? How do you analyze it?
Well, I think the intelligence community has known about this. I mean, assuming this report coming out of the Washington Post today is correct. It's probably based on an intelligence community assessment, which would include the intelligence agencies, and they will agree or potentially disagree about the state of things. So we're being brought in on the conversation today, if this story is correct. But I assess that going back last year, this spring, that we had a pretty good idea that they were making moves in this direction. And they're confirming it today. But once again, there are still some capabilities they need to develop to finish out that ICBM program. That's right. They have to worry on accuracy, warhead, reentry capabilities, things along that line.
Well, but this Washington Post story Apparently, Japan has also said this is the case too. So Japan intelligence also saying this is true. Just go over the headlines again in case you're just joining us. North Korea says it's seriously considering a strategy to strike Guam, where 12,000 Americans are on a military base there, with mid to long range missiles. North Korea says strike on Guam will be carried out in a consecutive, successive way once the leader gives the order. Herb, to you, here we are talking about this, and I mentioned earlier in the show that the story with North Korea, it seems like we went from like a Cuban-style military crisis to the Manhattan Project in Pyongyang. How did this happen so quickly?
Well, in my judgment, one of the reasons why it happened is because of the UN sanctions provisions that were passed this week. Obviously, this alarmed the North Koreans. It also put enormous pressure on them. And interestingly, it was passed with the support of Russia as well as China. And so to some degree, that might have been surprising to the North Koreans. It may very well have triggered this kind of militant response on the part of the North Korean government.
And of course, what we were talking about, coal, iron ore, a lot of it gets sold to Russia, a lot of it gets sold to China. Most of it, I think, gets sold to China. Bruce, to you, does this make those sanctions meaningless now, or what does it mean for the UN sanctions that we were just talking about this weekend being such a big breakthrough?
Right. Well, they're a good, though incremental improvement over the other 9 or 10 UN resolutions. So each resolution is better than the one before. Each one is the strongest in history. But even with this one, there's other steps that can occur that the U.S. would have wanted. But again, it was watered down by China. I think, with rising tensions, those of us working Korea, we feel like we're always on a knife edge of tension for years on end. But the things I worry most about are about escalation and miscalculation. Even a tactical level clash on the Korean Peninsula can escalate to a strategic crisis in the blink of an eye. And miscalculation is as you have 3 militaries, North and South Korea and the U.S., in close proximity to each other, each talking about preemption. I will preempt if I detect signs of your attack, and vice versa. Then you could stumble or miscalculate yourself into a crisis.
Make a mistake. And Herb, I want to take you to one more thing before we go here. We don't have a ton of time. But the president has been saying that North Korea should not be allowed to threaten the U.S. Did he inherit, though, a philosophy of really kicking the can down the road with North Korea?
Well, I mean, you saw this with several presidents, both Republican and Democrats, who did very little. You may recall that Clinton actually said that the crisis was over because of the food that would be provided to North Korea. So again, I think that we've miscalculated one after another.
One after another, and on it goes. I want to thank my panel for joining me tonight. Thank you so much for your help. Appreciate your time. Lou Dobbs is coming up next right here on